and welcome to the ACR Journals on Air podcast. I am your host, Vicky Shamagam. The manuscript we will be discussing today is RheumMadness, Creating an Online Community of Inquiry in Rheumatology, published in Arthritis Care and Research. A link to the manuscript and disclosures are in our show notes from today. I'm pleased to welcome this project's first author and chief namer, Dr. David Leverins. Dr. Leverins is an educator and rheumatologist at Duke University. He recently was made the fellowship director at Duke, and he has a growing body of work in medical education. He is in his third year of a Clinician Scholar Educator Award from the Rheumatology Research Foundation to create RheumMadness, an online tournament of rheumatology concepts based on collaborative social constructivist learning. This project was part of his Master's in Education degree that he completed last year through the University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted and honored to have a chance to be here. I want to say I really love formats like this podcast where we get to hear more from study authors about their work. And I'm honestly really impressed with the variety of topics you're covering on the podcast. As a program director of a rheumatology fellowship, I particularly enjoyed your previous episode with Dr. Fernandez-Ruiz on supporting international graduates in rheumatology. I found it to be a really rich discussion on an important topic, and it was a privilege to hear both of your stories as you work through the visa system during medical training, and I found it really helpful in my role as a program director. So I'm humbled and honored to have a chance to share my own work on this platform.
Oh, fantastic. It's so kind of you to mention that. That episode was very near and dear to my heart also. So as many of my listeners know, my family are college basketball fans, and I'm familiar with March Madness, the annual basketball tournament. But I have to confess, I have seen the tweets, the social media commentary about RheumMadness, and I do not understand it at all. So David, can you explain where this idea came from and what this madness is all about?
Yes, I'd love to. And I just want to say on this topic, we know that it can be a bit of a steep learning curve, especially for those who are not sports fanatics, are not basketball fanatics, and particularly for those outside of the US who may not even be familiar with March Madness. So I will try to give a brief explainer of what this whole thing is, especially because one of the major tenets of RheumMadness is we really want it to be for everyone. One of our taglines is that RheumMadness is the place for everyone who is crazy about rheumatology to connect, collaborate, compete, and learn together. And we really mean it. So we really want everyone from attendings, fellows, residents, medical students, advanced practice providers, non-rheumatologists, even patients to participate in this learning activity. So what is RheumMadness? Essentially, it is a tournament of learning concepts that are competing against each other to be named the most important concept in the tournament that year. So we call it RheumMadness because it is based off of the idea of March Madness, which is basically a tournament every year in basketball, college basketball, where they take 64 of the best teams in the country and they have them compete against each other in a series of single elimination matchups. So the first round, 64 teams, then 32 teams, etc. So even if you're not familiar with basketball, you probably know how single elimination tournaments work. So in RheumMadness, instead of basketball teams, it's rheumatology learning concepts. And I know that can be a little bit hard to get your head around. And so we actually help our participants learn about the teams by reading scouting reports about each team. And these scouting reports are written by our participants, actually. So in the first year of RheumMadness, the year that we're talking about, the 2021 tournament, there were actually 40 different fellows from all around the country who came together to write scouting reports about each team in the tournament.
And the teams are like recently published manuscripts or larger, broader rheumatology concepts?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. So we vary that up from year to year. So for the first year of the tournament, the 2021 tournament, the one that this paper is based on, we based each team on one article that had been published within the previous 2 years. So it was basically emerging topics in rheumatology. So it was things like the BLISS-LN trial for belimumab and lupus nephritis, competing against the TULIP trial for anifrolumab in a lupus region. And those teams, whichever won that matchup, would match up against another region like ANCA-vasculitis, the teams of Avacopan, the Advocate trial, versus the Pexavast trial. And whichever team won that would keep it against the winner of the lupus region, and so on.
Got it. So you kind of grouped by your topic areas, were your regions, but eventually you kind of narrow it down to the most important concept over that 2-year period for rheumatology.
That's right. And a lot of people then ask, well, okay, I understand how a basketball team could win a basketball game, like which team had more points, but how does each team actually win? And that's where we have a blue ribbon panel of experts. So we have usually 7 people from all around the country, various stages of career. So we'll have academicians, private practitioners, assistant professors, all the way up to professors, and even fellows on the panels. And these panels will vote. And basically their votes determine the winner of each matchup. And then the way that participants actually participate in this is just like in March Madness, you may or may not be familiar with the idea of filling out your own bracket.
Oh, yeah. No, the kids do it every year.
Yeah.
The Jayhawks always win in my house, so you just need to know that.
Amazing. You know, somehow the Baylor Bears tend to win in my bracket, but that actually worked out pretty well for me in 2021. But yeah, so just like that. So we ask participants, so basically anyone who wants to fill out their own bracket where they try to predict what the blue ribbon panel is going to choose in the tournament.
Ah. But so that means you have to have a bit of an idea as to who's on the blue ribbon panel, right?
Well, yeah, there's a various ways of playing that game. So you could play the game where you try to read about the blue ribbon panel, what's their background, what are their interests. But I will say we generally tend to mix it up with the panel so much that it's kind of, you could maybe predict maybe what one person's going to do, but it's kind of hard to get an idea. I don't even know what the blue ribbon panel is going to do every year. So I'm
they're a little
usually
bit like
surprised.
Supreme Court justices. You can't always figure out what they're thinking.
It's very hard to figure out what they're thinking. Yes. And, you know, the panel members, I'll talk to them. So as we'll talk about, we have a variety of other ways of learning about the team. So we've got like scouting reports that you can read, which are so fun. They're like brief little primers about the topic. And the fellows and the other people who write these scouting reports fill them with basketball puns and other sports analogies, which is, it makes them a ton of fun to read. But we also have a podcast that you can listen to where you learn about the teams. And actually, what we do is we interview the scouting report authors that wrote the scouting reports about the team themselves. And we have discussion on social media, especially Twitter, about the teams. And basically,
I've seen this stuff on Twitter for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, through all of this, you kind of get an idea of what other people are thinking. And you don't know, is the blue ribbon panel taking this into account? Are they just making their own decisions? Are they even reading the scouting reports? Are they just basing it on the base article? You don't know. So it's a bit of a mystery.
Excellent. And tell us about the timing, because I think for people kind of outside of the US, not familiar with the timing of this basketball thing, when does it start? Is it too late for people to participate this year? Just give us a little bit of info about that.
Yeah, thanks. So this is actually great timing for us to do this because we are actually currently in the middle of our 3rd season of RheumMadness. So the paper we're talking about is 2 seasons ago, essentially. The season we're doing right now is so much fun. We're in the middle of it, and I'll explain what that means to be in the middle of it in a minute, but it's called the All-Star season. So this year, we asked participants to actually submit their own teams. Like, who do you want to see in this tournament? And the prompt is, what do you think is the most important and transformational article ever written in the field of rheumatology?
Oh, wow. Okay,
yeah, ever. And they had to be at least 10 years old. The articles had to be at least 10 years old, and no one on the scouting report team that submitted the topic could have actually been an author on that study. But basically, people came out of the woodwork to submit these teams. So we actually now this year had 131 people collaborate to create scouting reports for 22 teams in the tournament. This is from 19 different fellowship programs and 2 private practice groups who submitted these teams. And I'm so excited. They're so amazing. And, you know, we have things like the first trials demonstrating the efficacy of anti-TNF inhibitors.
Yeah, I remember them actually.
Yes. And those, you know, on the other side of the bracket, we have things like the first description of rheumatoid arthritis in 1800 by a medical student, or the original description of systemic onset JIA by George Still, competing against the discovery of cortisone by Dr. Hench. And so it's basically a huge history lesson this year into the field of rheumatology, which is just so fun because it really is getting back to our fundamentals of who we are as rheumatologists. And it's kind of inspirational.
Yeah, I love rheumatology history, actually. It lets me geek out a little bit. So.
Yeah, so it's so fun. And so this year, the tournament will progress along the same timeline that it always does. And we're going to repeat this year after year. So essentially, in late February to early March, we release the bracket. People can see all the teams in the tournament. They can read the scouting reports. They can listen to podcast episodes learning about the teams in the tournament. They can tweet with each other or talk to each other on social media about their teams in the tournament, who they think is going to win. And that goes on for several weeks until basically around the same time when the NCAA March Madness tournament starts, which is kind of late March, mid to late March. And that is the time at which people can actually submit their brackets. And that needs to be in before the tournament starts. And then basically the tournament progresses. The Blue Ribbon panel places their votes, and you see how your bracket matches up against the Blue Ribbon panel's votes until finally the winning team of RheumMadness is crowned. And more importantly, the winning participants with the most correct predictions in RheumMadness are crowned. It's just really a lot of fun to see people wailing and gnashing their teeth at their brackets being busted or arguing with the Blue Ribbon panel about who they should have chosen and all of that. So it's a lot of fun.
And anyone can participate, right? You don't have to be a trainee and you don't have to be in North America, correct?
No, yeah, exactly. So you can be anywhere in the world. You can be any type of person, any connection to rheumatology at all. It is free to participate. Submitting a bracket is very simple. You just go to our website, you just Google RheumMadness and you will find us and it'll take it from there. And really, this is meant to be educational and fun. And so people sometimes get a little overwhelmed and they're like, oh my goodness, there's so much content. Just engage with what you find interesting and then fill out your bracket. And you will learn from participating in this tournament, as we will talk about in the rest of this podcast about how we know that you will learn.
Okay, yeah, I love edutainment actually and gamification, just kind of helping reach learners where they are. You may recall during that seminal 2019 meeting when the ACR was making the pivot from a staid annual meeting to the infamous ACR convergence with a capital C, we partnered with an educational consultancy that helped us kind of stretch into more novel educational experiences. So we introduced the TED Talks. We had that throwable microphone that many people remember. We introduced the community hubs and started using social media for crowdsourcing some of the educational content of the meeting. So as an educationalist, tell us about the educational theories underpinning your project.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. And this is where I think a lot of people who have gotten to know me through RheumMadness know that I love rheumatology. I'm just overly enthusiastic about rheumatology in general. I think it's the best field ever. But I think a lot of people don't know how much of a education nerd I am. And really, this project came out of my master's work, learning about some of these educational theories and theoretical frameworks that we can use to understand, build, and assess different educational initiatives. And so RheumMadness is actually constructed on a theoretical framework called the Community of Inquiry Framework and a learning theory called social constructivism.
Tell us about that. I'm sure many people have never heard of that.
So. Yeah, so absolutely. So this is basically, it's fancy words, but just in general, this is just a way of understanding what we're doing as we engage in a learning activity. So there's a variety of different ways you can understand and assess different educational activities. And the theoretical perspective that you bring to that assessment is really important to understand what kinds of questions you're asking as you research and assess that initiative. So here's what RheumMadness is not. So RheumMadness is not, we come with a set agenda of different things that we would like our participants to learn. And at the end of it, we assess, did they learn those things?
Aha. So there are no learning objectives?
Well, so sort of, but there really aren't. We're not coming at it with, we want by the end of this initiative for you to have learned these things. We want our participants to build that knowledge together as they connect with each other, as they share knowledge, as they discuss, as they create scouting reports, those kinds of things. And so that is where the theory of social constructivism and the community of inquiry framework are really perfect for understanding what we're really doing and what participants' learning experience is throughout the activity. So basically, social constructivism is just a way of saying that what we really are trying to look at is how people are building knowledge together in a social context. This is really founded, especially the community of inquiry framework, which I'll talk about in a minute, is really founded on some of the foundational philosophical theories of John Dewey from the early 1900s, who pioneered the concept of inquiry-based learning as a way to foster deep and meaningful educational experiences. And I really think this quote from John Dewey helps us understand what we're really doing through social constructivist assessments. He wrote, "It's the quality of mental process, not the production of correct answers, that is the measure of educative growth." So what we're really trying to do through the community of inquiry framework isn't to assess the production of correct answers. We are trying to understand the quality of the mental process and the social context that our participants are experiencing as they engage in RheumMadness.
So how do you measure that? Your manuscript is analyzing effectiveness of this as an educational tool. Can you tell us about how you measured learning in this kind of gamification strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where we use this community of inquiry framework. So the community of inquiry framework is a tool that was built based on those social constructivist theories and John Dewey's philosophical frameworks, where it basically describes the educational experience of a learner as three interconnected domains or presences: the cognitive presence, the social presence, and the teaching presence. And essentially, through assessing each of those presences, what we're doing is we're describing, again, the quality of the mental processes or the learning experience of the learner as they engage in the process. So within the cognitive presence, you have different domains like knowledge triggering, so just interest, to knowledge exploration. So, okay, I'm interested, now I'm going to explore different learning materials to kind of engage with this material. Then we have integration, where now I'm making connections between the things that I'm learning and the things I already know. And then finally, knowledge resolution. So I'm not just learning about these concepts. I can think of ways that I can apply the things I just learned to my current practice or my life. And so the community of inquiry framework has a series of ways of assessing each of these presences that have been validated in numerous other studies. So there's a community of inquiry framework survey, for example, that has been developed to assess each of these domains and some of the subdomains pertaining to these three presences through a survey. And this survey has been shown to be, about just as good as actually just analyzing different learner comments or other direct comments from learners and actually doing a qualitative analysis on those. And so this is a really nice framework that's been studied. Actually, the COI, the Community of Inquiry Framework, has been quoted in the higher education literature thousands of times. And so we're bringing this tool into the medical education space to try to understand this project.
And so what did you find? I guess your manuscript that was recently published looked at that first year of your RheumMadness project. Can you tell us what you found when you ran this analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. So, essentially we had three primary research questions when we were trying to assess RheumMadness. Number one is we wanted to describe participant engagement with the experience. And then we wanted to describe educational experience of our learners. And that description of educational experience was based on the COI, the Community of Inquiry Framework. And then we wanted to understand the relationship between participant engagement in RheumMadness and their educational experience as described by the COI. So first, regarding engagement, we assessed this two ways. One is we directly measured participants' engagement. We looked at how many bracket submissions did we get. We got 100 bracket submissions. How many times did people review the scouting reports? We tagged them with a Google Analytics tab. So we saw there were 1,472 scouting report views over the course of the tournament. How did people engage on social media? There were 486 tweets about RheumMadness from 105 users. What about the podcast? There were 2,449 podcast downloads over that time period. Then we also had people self-report their engagement. And basically, we asked them of each of these curricular elements: the scouting reports, the podcast, tweeting about RheumMadness. How often did you do that? And so we had people say almost not at all the way up to like every day I was engaging with these things throughout the course of the tournament. And so that gave us a good idea of participants' engagement, both through direct metrics and then through self-report. Then in that same survey where we asked self-report, we asked them some of those same questions that were in that community of inquiry framework survey that I just told you about, that's been studied many, many other times in higher education to assess the cognitive, social, and teaching presences. We asked them those same questions just about RheumMadness. And that helped us understand their learning experience. And then we could do those analyses where we compared, okay, if you engaged with these elements in RheumMadness, what impact did that have? Or what was the association between that level of engagement and community of inquiry experience with each of these presences? And I can go into more detail there if you'd like about kind of some of the interesting tidbits that we found that helped us understand what we were really doing with this tournament.
I guess one of the things I'm interested in is your first year, I think, kind of coincided with the pandemic, right? So this kind of almost fortuitous in a way, because your opportunity that year for educational engagement for the fellows was somewhat limited. And so could you speak to how that potentially disruptive event became a bit of a driving force behind the initiative, and whether that gave you any unexpected lessons? Were there things that didn't work out the way you expected or turned out even better than you expected?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, and this is where, obviously the pandemic was horrible, but for this project in particular, it actually was timed so that our tournament could really support the education of rheumatology trainees in this critical period where we really lost a lot of in-person learning activities. So initially, RheumMadness was actually planned to be a pilot among just 5 fellowship programs for 2 years. But because of the pandemic, we actually started our first year with engaging everyone in the rheumatology community. And that's really where understanding the social presence of RheumMadness was so important. What we really saw is that, yes, people had high cognitive presences as they engaged in more kind of didactic experiences like reading the scouting reports and listening to the podcast. But it was really that social media aspect on Twitter and other social media platforms that gave people this social presence in the tournament, which we also felt was so critical. The social presence, it measures things like, could I express myself as a real person in this platform? Could I really feel like a part of the group of the rheumatology community? And actually, not even in this paper, but in the subsequent analyses that we presented at the 2022 ACR Convergence meeting, we actually, and this is one of my favorite things that we found that early trainees, like medical students and residents, are particularly impacted by that social presence. They really love this tournament as an opportunity to feel like they're a part of the rheumatology community. And that makes my educator heart so happy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think I'll be interested to see how this evolves over time. Can I clarify one thing? So the content is durable, right? So the content stays online even after the official month of March has ended. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have archives where you can go back and read all the prior scouting reports. And, I've been told by some of my own fellows, they're like, you know what? Oh, there was this study that said that actually, was analyzing the true cardiovascular outcomes and of febuxostat. What was that? I remember finding it in the RheumMadness tournament. What was it? Oh, it was the FAST study. And they actually went back and found the scouting report. And then that led them to the article. I was like, yes, this is perfect. It's a way in. I mean, we're really trying to get people to find passion in rheumatology and connect to some of these amazing articles and studies that have been done.
But so that also, I think, helps fellowship directors around the country. Perhaps you have smaller programs than yours where they, are just looking for different formats of educational content. And I feel like those things can be really incredibly helpful as you're trying to encourage learning within your program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite tweets that just came out about this year's tournament is some folks at a program where actually they put the bracket up and they were reading the scouting reports, and it was the basis of a fellowship didactic curriculum event. And it made me so happy. And also to the point of smaller programs or other things, we actually now have leaders on our leadership team, like residents and medical students, who found RheumMadness because they don't have a rheumatology training program in their base residency, at the institution where they are. And RheumMadness helped them connect into the rheumatology community, even without that direct connection of having a fellowship program connected to their institution. And that just makes me so happy of helping people connect to this amazing community of learners and educators that we have in rheumatology, however way we can.
I completely agree. So I'm going to pivot from that a little bit to talk now about your career. During your training, you moved through several different institutions, all very well respected in the rheumatology community. You completed medical school at UT Southwestern. You did your internal medicine residency at Vanderbilt and then fellowship at Duke. I wondered if you could share with our listeners, now that you have benefit of a few years of hindsight, your experience of that journey through training, both geographically and then as you grew as a rheumatologist and educator.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is I'm so incredibly thankful for all the mentors that I've had at each of those institutions throughout each stage of my training. I really discovered a love of rheumatology during medical school. Actually, for those that are interested, my wife, who's not medical, told me to do rheumatology when I was a medical student. She was like, what's this specialty rheumatology? As she was reading lists of different specialties, like, you should do that.
Ah, that's
I was like,
great.
that sounds like you. So I was like, okay. So, I went and did these rotations at UT Southwestern, and the people there were so amazing and really encouraged my interests. And at Vanderbilt, same thing. Dr. Crawford, Dr. Krug, Dr. Cecilia Chung, so many people there really fostered my development, got me connected, got me involved in research activities, helped me explore this amazing world of rheumatology. Got to attend my first meeting in San Francisco. And then at Duke, some of the amazing connections there. I have to just, of course, say a huge thank you to an amazing educator and personal mentor of mine, Dr. Lisa Christiani Schreiber, who was my program director when I was a fellow. Now she's the vice chair of education at Duke, and many of you know her as an amazing educator in the rheumatology community. She's a main mentor for me on this project. Through the months of writing the CSE award grant, it was many late nights. She was reviewing the grant and helped me really put it together. And then also want to thank, there's so many people at Duke that have been fundamental to my career experience. I also want to thank Dr. Matt Sparks, who is the creator of RheumMadness, which is really the tournament on which RheumMadness is founded. So RheumMadness has been going on now for 11 years. Matt Sparks was one of the co-creators of that and really was so helpful to us as we were thinking about doing this project, and sat down with us, was totally willing to allow us to kind of spin this off and support us and give us mentorship and advice. And then I also just want to say, for me, journeying through those institutions, it was also really important. It helped me make different connections, et cetera. But a lot of those decisions were primarily just kind of what we felt like we needed to do as a family. So I just always try to remind, if there's any trainees that are out there listening, it's important to think about you being a person, even as a trainee, and what's important to you as a person. And that's another reason why I journeyed through those different institutions. And it was always a wonderful experience there.
Yeah, I think that is really important, actually, as you're sort of advising people who are earlier in career, is always to think of your training like a journey, that you're moving a little bit to get different experiences, to get different exposures. And there is a lot of benefit that comes from moving geographically, learning about different institutions, recognizing there are different ways to achieve similar results and different styles of practice. And I think having a broad exposure as a trainee is incredibly important to your kind of growth as a rheumatologist.
Absolutely. It really is. And I've been privileged to have a chance to work at all these amazing institutions, but it's also amazing, as now I'm entering this community of educators in rheumatology. I don't know what it is about our specialty, but there are just so many amazing educators all over the country, all over the world in rheumatology. And I've started to get to meet some of these people. And what's so fun about this group of people is they're not just amazing at what they do, they're also collaborative, willing to encourage each other, support each other's careers. That's always been my impression of the educator community in rheumatology. And it's amazing to be a part of that.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because you are a proud recipient of the Rheumatology Research Foundation Clinician Scholar Educator Award, or CSE Award. So that is a 3-year career development award specifically supporting medical education research, but also providing these opportunities for mentorship, collaboration. And it's an interesting award because it is actually open to applicants at different career stages, and very frequently we'll have a mix of junior early career investigators such as yourself when you were first funded, and also more seasoned educators. Can you speak to kind of both how the award impacted your growth as an educator, and then also a little bit about this growing cadre of CSE awardees and the tribe of individuals that are kind of supporting that community?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, thank you so much to the Rheumatology Research Foundation for trusting me with this award. I've done my best to do them proud, and it was an extreme honor to get this award. And I really felt it was my obligation to not just meet our aims, but exceed them. And so I'm just so thankful for this opportunity. I mean, without this opportunity, I think you already heard my master's in medical education was essentially part of me completing the CSE award. So I started my master's in medical education during my second year of rheumatology fellowship before I had a CSE award. But I would not have been able to finish the master's without this CSE award. So it supported my remaining years of the master's program, which was so critical because my master's helped me discover this theoretical framework that helped me study it. And then the CSE award helped me really kind of take that home. And through that, it's given me so many other opportunities. I've gotten to now be a program director of a rheumatology fellowship program, which is the best job in the world. I love it so much. And yeah, I get to be a part of this community of CSE awardees, still intimidated to see some of the amazing awardees that are a part of that community. But again, so welcoming. There's an email list. People ask each other questions, connect people between mentors and mentees, connect people with different projects. And it's so amazing. So yes, when we go to the program directors meeting at ACR Exchange or other things, it's just really fun to connect in with that community.
Yeah, I don't think the CSE tribe has a special handshake yet, but I do think that it's a community that has really grown and supported the field of rheumatology in a way that the RRF probably didn't realize would happen when they were setting the award up, but has really paid off dividends of wealth in education. So I should mention, so annually, right around the time of March Madness, is also the time that if you're ever thinking that you potentially want to become a rheumatology educator, you should be looking up the RRF application process for the CSE award. I think the deadline typically is in early May. And I think it's a very valuable early career and mid-career award for rheumatologists. David, do you have any advice for rheumatologists considering applying for the CSE award? What would you say to other applicants?
Yeah, so I would definitely encourage people to apply. So number one, I just want to say, looking at the list of other awardees can be intimidating and it can make you think that you're not ready to apply for that award. But I will say, as you mentioned, a whole gamut of people will get that award from early career all the way to advanced. And so if you're thinking about applying and you have a great idea, you should absolutely apply. Now, I do have a few pieces of advice, just based on my own experience. I personally, I don't know, but I personally think a big reason why my award was successful is because I did have this educational theory and theoretical framework underpinning it, not just as like a grantsmanship thing, but it made it a better project in that it helped us understand what sorts of questions we were trying to assess in our research project. So I'll give you a quote from one of my amazing mentors who I've already mentioned, Dr. Christiane Schreiber. On any project I've ever worked with her on, she's always said, look, if you teach someone something, they will learn it. So that's not really groundbreaking educational work to demonstrate that you taught someone something and that it worked and that they learned it. With a CSE award, you can use theoretical frameworks to ask deeper questions, not just did they learn something, but how did they learn it? Why did they learn it? Does this type of learning work better than that type of learning? What is the difference between a trainee's confidence and true competence after they've learned something? What was, as in our project, their educational experience as they engaged in the activity, and what does that mean about what each portion of the curriculum is doing? And these are the kinds of questions you really can't ask unless you have a theoretical framework or other lens that you can base your work on. And so I would really encourage people to think about their projects through a lens of an educational theory, because it can really help strengthen the research aims and questions that you're asking in your project.
That's fantastic advice. And I think this is a great award. And I definitely would encourage any rheumatologist who's interested in education in looking it up and considering applying. David, I want to thank you for joining us today. I've really enjoyed this discussion. I am going to now watch this year's tournament unfold with much greater engagement in the process. And I'm really glad that you explained it to us.
I really thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this work. I just want to also just say thank you so much to the amazing co-authors that were on this paper with me, which is really the original RheumMadness leadership team. We've now expanded with about 12 to even more different leaders on our leadership team. And as you just heard, hundreds of people all over the country that have been participating in this tournament, creating scouting reports for us. None of this would have been possible without the participants. And RheumMadness is that way by design. So I'm just so thankful for everyone who touches this project. This is really about the participants. So thank you.
Fantastic. And I want to close this episode actually also by thanking the engagement and innovation of our learning community of rheumatologists. I think in the past, some might have written off some of these edutainment endeavors as unconventional. But in this era of short attention spans and knowledge at our fingertips, embracing these novel strategies for lifelong learning will allow rheumatology to continue to be at the forefront of medical education. Thank you all for listening to this podcast, perhaps less novel than RheumMadness, but also a form of edutainment. ACR Journals on Air is a production of the American College of Rheumatology. Please follow at AC Rheum on social media and rate and subscribe to our podcast at acrjournalsonair.org or wherever you get your podcasts.